Look, before this sorry tale unfolds, let's get one thing straight. I love my wife. She is, after all, the best looking woman that I have ever met. And I couldn't believe it when, after 6 months of courtship, she had said yes to my proposal of marriage. My mother, who could be a bit of a tyrant when it came to my choice of girlfriends, shook her head in disbelief when I informed her about the forthcoming wedding. "You haven't gotten that lovely girl pregnant, have you, Michael?" A look of despair was written across her face. She could see a divorce 6 months down the line when the stunning Cassandra had gotten tired of me. "No, Mother, I haven't. I know it's hard to believe, but the truth is Cassandra loves me." The wedding reception was held at a very swanky golf club, the secretary of which was Arthur, my newly acquired father-in-law, who, to my relief, was footing the bill for a very expensive do. My mother beamed with pride all the way through the reception, and I was on clouds lucky 9. I had a beautiful wife, a really easygoing father-in-law, and Helen, a mother-in-law who I would discover in the very near future was a fantastic cook. Arthur informed me that Helen had prepared all the reception food, and it's just a sample of the many treats that you can look forward to now that you're part of our family. That was just the beginning of a culinary masterclass. Frankie Evans, my best mate and best man, said about a year later when I told him about the food my mother-in-law cooks for me, "You're a lucky sod, Mike. All I ever get from Joan, my bloody mother-in-law, are dirty looks for stealing her daughter." I had nodded in agreement at his description of me, and then commiserated with him about his choice of mother-in-law. All of this was 4 years ago. Cassandra proved to be the wife from heaven and a wonderful mother to both of our kids. Having good, well-paid jobs, our salaries enabled us to buy a house in the best part of town. It is a house that Cassandra keeps in immaculate condition. What a woman I had married. Eleanor, our daughter, even at 3 years of age, is a carbon copy of her mother, blonde and gorgeous. Tom, our 2-year-old son, who all of Cassie's friends have fallen in love with, is a blue-eyed boy with a killer smile. So my life is pure magic. Cassie makes sure that our house is kept in perfect style. The kids, a bit mad like most kids, never seem to mess the place up. Our back garden is a manicured piece of Eden. Beautiful flowering shrubs are dotted tastefully around the lawn. A lawn which, I might add, even the dog doesn't do its business on. After Eleanor was born, we took it in turns to visit our respective parents' homes for Sunday lunch. One week it would be my mother's house for dinner. My mother always invited a neighbour on these occasions, just for a bit of boasting, you understand. The following week it would be Helen's for our Sunday meal. Helen is an elegant woman, even more beautiful than her daughter, and a lady brimming with magnetic charm. In all of Cassie's perfections, there is just one tiny flaw: she can't cook. Hence the alternate weekly visits to our parents' homes for Sunday lunch. And if it wasn't for the Chinese and Indian takeaways within driving distance from our home, then we would have had to spend all our meal times in our parents' homes or die of starvation. So Helen's culinary genius began a seduction that I couldn't resist. If I said it wasn't all my fault, then you might laugh and say, "Yeah, I know, it's never your fault. Always put the blame onto someone else." But it's true, honest. It had all begun about a year after Cassie and I were married. We had just eaten another magnificent meal at her mother's house. Cassie was in the kitchen with her father washing a mountain of dishes. I was sitting at the table enjoying an after-dinner glass of Arthur's excellent red wine. Helen flashed those beautiful grey eyes at me. "Did you enjoy the steak, Michael?" I nodded my enthusiasm for the meal. It was the best sirloin I'd ever tasted. Helen beckoned me over to the settee, and like a schoolboy, I obeyed. Helen always looks good, even after a couple of hours in a hot kitchen. Unlike my mother, who is always a lather of sweat whilst cooking, Helen has that cool, calm assurance about her, not a hair out of place, and just enough cleavage on show to make it tempting, but definitely not tacky. I'm glad you enjoyed the sirloin, Michael. I cooked it for 2 minutes each side in unsalted butter. Her voice ran like warm honey. Somewhere in the crevices of my mind, which was now a bit fuzzy, and not just from the wine, a little alarm bell jangled. There was a hint of perspiration on Helen's top lip. Her tongue slipped from between pouting lips and slowly licked the bead of sweat away. Her nostrils flared slightly, and a river of perspiration began its journey down my spine. Just the way you liked it, eh, Michael? Pink and moist. My heart thrummed. I was about to answer yes when her hand brushed across my forehead, pushing back a few strands of hair. Her hand was cool, but the touch was electric. I pulled away, startled. My eyes were glued to the kitchen door. Surely Arthur would walk in. Oh, God help me, Cassie. That door remained ominously closed, and for that small mercy, I thanked the same God. Helen's eyes twinkled. What would you like for afters, Michael? There's plenty on offer. My Adam's apple bobbled frantically. Don't worry, Michael. They'll be in the kitchen for a while yet. A hand slid across my thigh, and I nearly fell off the settee. Helen's smile disappeared. The grey eyes filled with sadness. Everything will be all right, Michael. Arthur won't come in yet. Her voice was a whisper. You see, he's not really interested in what I do. And the panic on my face caused that sweet smile to reappear. Arthur's a man's man, if you get my meaning. I quickly moved to the edge of the settee, spilling most of the wine in my hurry to get away from this seductive siren. What about Cassandra, Helen? She's my wife, for God's sake. My heart was pounding now. What would have happened if she'd come in and saw what you just did? My throat was as dry as dust. How the hell would I explain to Sandra that her mother was trying to get into my trousers? Please, Michael, don't worry. Arthur will keep it in the kitchen for a while yet. She won't suspect anything. Then her manner changed. Arthur is not Cassandra's father. I got pregnant when I was 17, and Arthur, to my absolute delight, asked me to marry him. Ellen had ignored the look of disbelief on my face. It's a long story, Michael, and I'll tell you about it one day. Anyway, I needed a husband, and Arthur needed a wife, just to protect his family image. I was getting hotter now, and I could feel parts of my body reacting to her touches, which were sending tingling sensations throughout my body. Helen spoke again, seemingly unaware of my terror. When I first met him, I could tell he was gay. Arthur's family have always been in denial about his preferences. And then she leaned over and kissed my cheek, oblivious to the fear in my eyes. Any attempt to extricate myself from her embrace proved useless. Helen held me in a witch's spell. She continued with her story. Obviously, they did know about Arthur's predilection for men and chose to ignore it, hoping that some woman would come along and somehow cure him. Her lips kissed my throat and I just gave in. My own lips were all over her face and neck, and I swear to God, if Arthur had not shouted the question from the kitchen, do you two want coffee? Then I'm pretty sure we would have gotten down to business right there and then on the settee. Helen's voice was unbelievably calm. Yes, please, Arthur. Black. And can you bring the brandy in as well? A couple of minutes later, Cassie entered the living room carrying a silver tray with 4 cups of coffee on it. Next to the coffee was a bottle of French brandy. Cassie smiled sweetly at her mother and then sat down between the unbelievably cool Helen and her nervous wreck of a husband. I downed 2 brandies in quick succession, hardly tasting the spirit. Such was my fear. I had my hands clasped tightly together, hopefully disguising any tremble that might have been in them. And I feared that my mother's forecast might just be coming true. A divorce was looming. Arthur then entered the room carrying another tray, laden with perfectly iced cakes. These are little beauties, Mikey. He grinned at me. Helen only bakes them for really special occasions. I stared at him, amazed at the madness which had entered my life. Had he guessed? I could feel my shirt clinging to sweaty skin. Everything okay, Mikey? his smile, knowing. Then he gave me a barely perceptible nod of his head. Yes, I'm fine. My voice was a nervous squeak. Michael said he would come round during the week to sort out the weeds at the bottom of the garden. Helen's voice was flat and matter of fact. Cassie beamed a smile my way. Thanks, Mike. Dad's not very good with gardens. So, under the pretext of gardening or repairs to electrical goods, I spent my spare time during the next 3 years around at my in-laws. At first, it was the fabulous food which seduced me. Sizzling steaks covered in hot pepper sauce, the occasional lobster, oh, and yes, oysters. Huge platefuls of oysters. Helen was an energetic lover, and I needed all the help I could get. So I threw myself wholeheartedly into the sex, which, let me tell you, was a damn sight hotter than my mother-in-law's pepper sauce. Helen, who was 40 years old by now, was full of, shall we say, youthful enthusiasm. Arthur was always out when I showed up with the toolbox, which was never opened. Occasionally, though, I had a scary but exciting feeling that hidden eyes were upon us during our sexual gymnastics. Then last week it happened, a proverbial bolt from the blue. It was Tuesday evening. Cassie and I always have an Indian takeaway on a Tuesday. We were halfway through a spicy Rogan Josh when she treated me to one of her most radiant smiles. I've got great news, Mikey. Her eyes twinkled mischievously. She kept me in suspense for a couple of minutes before the words tumbled from her mouth. You're going to be a dad again, Michael. A piece of half-chewed curry lamb fell from my gaping mouth. When the stunned look had finally left my face, I put my arms around my gorgeous wife and kissed her passionately. Oh, Cassie. I'm delighted, I said, after wiping the little dribble of curry away from my chin. She kissed me back and soon we were giggling like love-struck teenagers. This is the best news I've had since our Tom was born, I murmured. My voice was husky with the expectation of taking that kiss a lot further. We kissed again and I made a mental note to end the foolishness with her mother and stick to takeaway curries in future. So, darling, when are we going to have this little brother or sister for our Eleanor and Tom to play with? I was bubbling with excitement now. Cassie threw her head back and laughed that glorious laugh, which infected her whenever she was truly happy. Not me, silly. I'm not pregnant. It's my mother who's going to have your baby. What? Oh, please, God, no. I'm so sorry, Cassandra. I can't explain it. And then my brain began a mental calculation. Would this baby be an aunt or uncle to my kids? Or a brother or sister? And would my mother be a granny to my mother-in-law's child? The permutations were too awful to contemplate. The doorbell rang. Seconds later, my in-laws were standing in front of me. Cassie smiled. Everything's going to be just fine, Mikey. Isn't it, Mother? Helen smiled at me. Yes, Michael. You really are one of us now. And by the way, it's going to be a little girl child. She'll be born at midnight on the 31st of October. We'll name her Cleo. My head is all over the place. Arthur is smiling at me, and it feels like I've stepped into a medieval fantasy.